The morning sounded wrong, like the air forgot how to breathe right, like the neighborhood's usual chorus of sprinklers and a bus 2 blocks over had nothing to lean on. The soft hush from my hedge line, that whisper that wraps your yard and says you're home, was gone. I stepped onto the porch with coffee still hot, and where 10 summers of trimming and watering and nursing had stood there. Where stumps raw and bright teeth knocked out of a smile, leaves wet on the grass, like confetti from a party I wasn't invited to. I walked the line slow, thumb on a fresh cut that felt cold and careless, no note on the door, no sticky warning, just a mess meant to be seen, and I said to nobody in particular. Who would do this because I knew and I didn't want to know at the same time? Hank across the street, old paramedic with the cane and the porch. Humor lifted a hand and said, "They got you too, Marcus." Then he leaned in and let the name roll out like a bad taste. Carol Whitman, HOA. 6-foot rule said she warned you. And I laughed without laughing. Because yeah, that happened. Except it didn't, because nobody knocked, nobody spoke, nobody asked. I am not a man who jumps to fire. 20 years running wires in hot attics taught me patience. But this wasn't work. This was my quiet, my boundary, my little sliver of peace in Willow Creek, where Maple Ridge Drive curves just enough that headlights don't hit the living room, and now anyone could look straight through me. I rinsed my hands, put on a clean shirt that didn't help, and walked to the so-called office they keep in the clubhouse behind the pool, pump's door propped with a paint can fan, humming like it wanted out. And there she was, papers tidy, smile tidy, voice tidy, Mr. Reed, she said, like we were between appointments, and I didn't sit. I asked why she cut my hedge line. She corrected me with a small, joyless smile. The contractor handled it, shrubs over 6 feet, page 7, our standards, uniformity matters, property, values matter. And I said what I had to say, which was simple. That rules are supposed to protect neighbors, not give her permission to trespass, and take a saw to what I planted. 2 moms with strollers pretended to read a bulletin while listening. My voice came up. Hers went soft, the way people do when they want witnesses to think they're reasonable, and then she was done with me file a complaint. Good day, and the walk home felt like a parade of glances, people looking and not looking. A rake paused mid-pull, a rose snipped that didn't need snipping, and Hank at my mailbox saying, "Be careful, she doesn't like the word no." And that night at my kitchen table, 3 in the morning, and coffee I shouldn't have had. I drew boxes on a yellow pad and crossed them out. File papers, and wait hire a lawyer, and bleed replant, and let her cut again. And then the idea settled like a weight that helps you stand. Not wood. Wood is a handshake with termites. Cinder block 6 feet straight line, rebar down, and mortar thick. Not pretty. Not a performance, just honest, like a lock is honest. I loaded the Ford with blocks until the bed squatted, grabbed mortar by the sack. Tried a new trowel in my hand, like a handshake that fit the kid at the counter, said big weekend. I said overdue. And when I backed down, Maple Ridge with concrete clacking like castanets. Heads turned, scooters slowed. A jogger tugged one earbud out, without meaning to. Hank unfolded 2 chairs that looked older than both of us and said, he couldn't lift, but he could talk trash like a champion. And I said that would do. I cut a trench and tied a string line, mixed the gray to peanut butter, buttered the first course and set it. Then the second tap and level and breathe, and with every clink of block on block, my pulse came down. Mid-morning, a blue SUV rolled slow. You know what I mean, that slow that's meant to sting. And Carol's face behind the glass didn't wave. I did 2 fingers off the trowel, and she circled back and parked and stood there in heels that had never seen a weekday sidewalk. Mr. Reed, do you really think a barricade is appropriate? And I said another block before I looked up. I think a woman cutting down another person's hedge without permission is inappropriate. So this feels like balance, and she said, I was creating hostility. And I said, if my wall is hostile and your chainsaw was order, then your dictionary and mine are different editions. She left with that tight click of heels that tries to sound like authority, and the first day ended with 2 courses set, and my back filing a formal complaint of its own, and Hank saying, keep laying the law, which made me smile because sometimes you need to hear it said plain. By Monday, the official letter came with the HOA logo in navy, like they were shipping law out of a gift shop. Non-compliant structure. Immediate action required harmony. Design standards. No numbers. No drawing. Just the country club version of a finger wag. And by lunch, Carol was back with a clipboard, because bullies love props. I trust you received the notice, she said. I did. I said. And I'm not out of printer paper if you need more. And she said, the board voted unanimously that my wall was a violation, and I smiled, because I've seen that vote. It sounds a lot like one person talking and 2 people nodding. And then she said, daily fines and legal remedies, and I stepped close enough that she could smell gray dust and told her every paper she posted would make a judge ask about trespass and a chainsaw. And I am a patient man with a long memory. And from under the oak, Hank barked a laugh that made her eyes flick like a hawk's. Then she left, and flyers showed up in mailboxes that said things without saying. My name, divisive structures, reckless projects, property values in danger, and a neighbor tore his in half at the curb just to hear it rip. The meeting that week was packed and hot, folding chairs and fans and the hum of a room that came to see a fight and maybe a mirror. Carol sat with a gavel like a judge without a courtroom. First item, non-compliant structure at 1429 Maple Ridge, and I stood and tried not to be a speech. I talked like you'd talk to a nephew, taking a bike apart for the first time, piece by piece my hedge cut, without notice or respect. Then a word called harmony thrown on top like a napkin. I didn't build a wall to flip anybody off. I built it because a boundary means something. Because if a person can cut what you grew while quoting a rule they misquote, then none of us owns our quiet, and maybe you don't like the look of concrete. I didn't build it to be liked. I built it so nobody touches my piece again. The room did that low rumble. When the temperature changes, a man in the back said she fined him for leaving his bin out until 2. A woman said her sunflowers were unapproved. Carol hit the gavel like it owed her money, and then Mr. Landry, who usually nods, found a spine and said, maybe enforcement needs votes from residents, and a process that isn't us talking to ourselves. Small words that felt like a big door opening, and I went home tired, but lighter. I finished the last courses in a heat wave that made the blacktop look like a mirage didn't cheer. Just stepped back and watched a straight line be exactly what it was. Hank clapped once like a coach fortress, he said. Boundary, I said. And we both knew the difference. People stopped to say their piece. Andre squeezed my shoulder and said, about time someone told her where the job stops. Paula frowned and said, it's imposing, and I said it lets me sleep, which is worth more than curb appeal, when your house is the only place your heart can sit down. Carol came just before sunset with sunglasses too late for the light, and asked if this was my grand statement. I said it's a solution, nobody cuts concrete, she said. I looked combative. Neighbors want community, and I told her respect is the only community I recognize, and this is me drawing the line where hers ends, and for once she didn't have a line that worked with half the street listening. The petition that followed didn't surprise me. The speed did. Andre on my porch with a clipboard. Neighbors who'd only waved signing their names like they were remembering their handwriting. A special election. In a week, Carol out, Landry stepping down, because nodding is a kind of power, too. A new board up there with shaky voices that sounded like honesty, and notices that weren't ambushes, but conversations. The street felt different, lighter, like someone cracked a window in a room that had been stuffy for years, kids chalked suns and hopscotch boxes. The mail carrier waved with her whole arm. My sister Nina parked at the curb and said, "I didn't think you'd do it," and then hugged me long enough to make me feel foolish and grateful in the same breath. And for a while I thought that's where the story ends. Then the county sent a letter about reviewing solid wall ordinances near public sightlines. A local blog ran a piece called "The Wall on Maple Ridge." A new neighbor left a pie with a note. "Welcome to the movement," and on the neighborhood app, Carol posted about civility and divisions, and how one man's project made people feel unwelcome. Comments flared until the thread locked, and I didn't type a word. I stood with my hand on rough gray and told myself what I told myself the morning I saw the stumps. You don't let someone else define your boundary for you. Maybe a future rule will draw a line I don't like. Maybe I'll have to fight again. Maybe a hedge would have grown back if I'd waited and smiled and trusted a process designed to hear the loudest clipboard. I don't know. I know that a person who's been kept small looks like trouble. The first time he stands up, full height, I know. I've been called stubborn, like it's a slur. I know when Hank sits at sundown and says, "You built more than a wall," he isn't talking about concrete. He's talking about a man deciding where he starts, and other people stop. And if you've ever had something taken with a smile and a citation, you understand. So tell me what you think down below. Was I right? Was I petty? Did I protect what's mine? Or did I change the block for the worse? Where's the line between order and control, safety and silence? Have you had your own HOA moment? Or a neighbor who crossed a line and called it community? Drop your story, your take, your pushback. I'll read every one. And if you want more real homeowner stories told the way they actually feel when you're the one paying the mortgage, hit subscribe, share this with the friend who loves a good neighborhood debate, and I'll see you in the next one.